everybody. This is the progress report for this very warm, delightful evening in Manchester. Actually, there were people dining outside and tables outside the restaurants on Elm Street.
I got a text from my wife, and it had a picture of a car and a beach. And the show must go on. I had to decline that offer.
Anyhow, first of all, I want to quickly apologize to our viewers for not having a live show last week or the week before. The week before, we had a pretty good excuse. There was a pretty big snowstorm. Lots of things were canceled. Lou D'Alessandro and I didn't want to drive that in the evening. But last week we don't have as good an excuse, except general malaise, exhaustion, and some issues about guest availability that we were seeking for. But we're going to make up for it big time this week because we have a wonderful guest. He's been here before, but we're having him here in his new capacity as a key person speaking for Revision Energy, and we're going to talk about clean energy in New Hampshire, particularly solar energy. And that's a subject near and dear to my heart, as many people will realize from my long years of dealing with energy issues in New Hampshire. And some real interesting headwinds for the solar industry here now that we'll talk about with Mr. Weeks. And as always, we hope you'll join us by calling in at 640-3091. And please check out our Facebook page, the Progress Report Facebook page, if you haven't. I believe next week we're going to bring in Mayor Jim Donchis, not the mayor of this city, but the mayor of New Hampshire's second city, Nashua, and we'll have some interesting discussions with him about what's the proposal for rail for Nashua he prefers as opposed to the Capital Corridor project, which would involve a different scheme for bringing passenger rail to the Nashua, Manchester, and Concord. That should be very interesting, and other things common to the interests of the two largest municipalities in the great state of New Hampshire. That's next week, Mayor Jim Donchis. And with that tease, ta-da! It's time for the POTUS report on the Progress Report.
Well, it's been a couple weeks since I've been on the air, and certainly a lot has happened. That would be certain fodder for the POTUS report on the Progress Report. But, you know, Bob, my heart's been very heavy for the past couple days. And I've kind of had some fun with the POTUS report. I've tried to be informative. I've tried to find things that aren't being reported and bring them to light. Sometimes been a little snarky. But my heart is not feeling snarky these days because we just lost 17 more kids down in Florida. And I'm uplifted by what I've seen as the reaction from their classmates. I see these kids that have begun to take real grassroots action. They have marched on Tallahassee, their state capital. They have been emulated across the country, including in front of the White House. They have been on television shows. They have been speaking out. They are beautiful. They are smart. They are
extremely
articulate.
Well-spoken. Articulate.
Their minds are focused. All of this while they're going through the kind of grieving that I hesitate to even try to imagine.
Right.
And yet, in Tallahassee just yesterday, they voted against even discussing any regulations to gun ownership in the state of Florida.
Particularly with regard to this type of weapon that this shooter used.
I'm not making distinctions. I'm not going to make distinctions.
Okay.
I want to talk big picture here, and I'm going to take a little bit longer, and I don't mean to cut too much into the show.
Right.
But we hear a lot of dissembling. We hear, bans don't work, or how do you define assault weapon, or the FBI dropped the ball, all kinds of these side things. And by the way, a lot of this is coming right out of Russia. And interestingly enough, folks, there's a lot of gun control, pro-gun control stuff coming out of Russia. The idea being to get us worked up, to get us into a froth against each other.
Did you say pro-gun control, or do you mean anti-gun?
No, I mean the Russians are playing both sides. They don't care who wins the argument as long as we're fighting each other. So you guys who agree with me that we need some common sense gun regulation, and you're going on Facebook and you're seeing these memes, well, guess what? A lot of that stuff that you totally agree with is coming out of Russia to tick us off and get us all fired up. And likewise, the the pro-gun, the pro-NRA stuff that you're seeing bandied about, especially on Facebook, these social networks, that's coming straight out of Russia. And you know what? If you look, you can see it. There's subtle grammatical errors in these things. You can see it. You can recognize it if you look. And I really hope people will start paying attention. But I want to get back to these beautiful kids who are out there trying to turn something so negative into something positive. And they're getting attacked. They are getting attacked by state representatives. One aide to a state representative in Florida accused two of these kids of being actors. It is outrageous. And I saw someone running for attorney general in the state of Florida get up, and you can hear it. The apologies, the things we can't do, the things that don't work. You just keep hearing it and hearing it. And I have noticed a pattern, folks. It's Republicans. It is Republicans. I don't usually put the label. I usually talk about left and right and one side and another, but it is Republicans who are standing in favor of gunnies. It's just they gotta have the guns. Look at the solution they're proposing. We'll put more guns in the schools. Yeah, we'll sell more guns. Who benefits? Gun manufacturers. Who are they? The NRA. I have a list here. In 2016, in the presidential election, the NRA spent $11,438,000 to support Donald Trump and spent another $19,756,000, over $31 million to get Donald Trump elected. Top 5 senators, contributions from the NRA. John McCain, $7.74 million. Republican, Arizona. Richard Burr, Republican, North Carolina, $6.99 million. Roy Blunt, Republican, Missouri, $4.55 million. Tom Tillis, Republican, North Carolina, $4.42 million. Cory Gardner, Republican, Colorado, $3.88 million. And I happen to know that the next 3 are also Republicans, but I'm going to move on to the top 5 representatives with the most contributions from the NRA. French Hill, Republican, Arkansas, $1.09 million. Ken Buck, Republican, Colorado, $800,544. David Young, Republican, Iowa, $707,662. Mike Simpson, Republican, Idaho, $385,731. Greg Glanforte, Republican, Montana, $344,630. When I was younger, people used to drink and drive a lot. And it wasn't as big a deal as it is right now. Sometimes you get pulled over, get told to get home quick before you get pulled over again. Well, a group of Mothers Against Drunk Drivers had something to say about that. They shamed drunk drivers. They shamed them. It became something that you just don't do. Smoking on airplanes, fouling the air of the people sitting next to you. They shamed people to the point where we stopped that. And yet it seems that these Republicans, I hate to have to say this, these Republicans apparently cannot be shamed. But folks, these are the leaders. You folks who are the ordinary folks who go out and vote and work and have kids in schools, you're not getting millions of dollars from the NRA. I wonder if you're ashamed to be a Republican today. Or should you be? I don't know. But I think we got to think about it. And that's the POTUS report and the progress report today.
Well, delivered with real passion and concern, and I applaud you for doing that, Mike. Happy to say my daughter, who lives down in Northern Virginia, the next town over from Fairfax, which is the headquarters of the NRA, and she's part of a group called Moms Demand Action. You mentioned Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Well, there's Moms Demand Action. Happy to say my daughter's part of it. Before we get to our guest, we have a caller. Let's.
Yeah, and by the way, folks, thanks for listening. I'm sorry to have taken so much, but this issue is very important to me, and it really has gotten under my skin, and I had to get that off my chest, and I'm willing to discuss it with anybody, even Republicans. But, folks, some minds have got to change. We cannot be defending this, but we do have Sandy.
Hello, Sandy. Welcome to the
Oh,
program.
looks like we lost her.
Oh, Sandy, sorry we didn't get to your call, but you're welcome to call back.
So let's
if you'd
turn to
like.
something more positive.
Well,
today,
you
Bob.
know, what you had to say is something that will resonate with our guest, Dan Weeks, because Dan is a person of a remarkable, with many remarkable talents and abilities, but he's very, very motivated to do good things. And I'm going to just take a minute to introduce you as best I can, Dan. I believe that when you were a student at Conval High School, you had a guest speaker come in, a remarkable New Hampshire lady named Granny D, Doris Haddock.
Granny D, that's right.
Granny D, and she inspired you. So for for a long time, you led the charge against the legal bribery that constitutes our election finance system that, Mike was talking about, these contributions. That was the target of your efforts for many, many years, and you did a lot of very good work, organized protest marches. You did a lot, and you were like these students at the Stoneham Douglas School. You got motivated, and their issues was guns. Yours was the corrupting influence of big money in politics, and these two, as Mike well illustrated, these two things intersect. And now I think you're on to I'm sure you haven't given that fight up either, but you've gone on to a new part of your career. By the way, you were a candidate for executive council in the last election, and the district that includes Nashua. And now you are working for one of our really great solar installer companies here in New Hampshire, Revision Energy.
That's right. Thank you so much, Bob, for having me back. Just before we turn to clean energy, if I may, that work dealing with what I consider to be an underlying cancer of our system, the insidious corrupting influence of big money in politics from the NRA, is a darn good example these days, but it's certainly not only the NRA.
It's on both sides, too.
It's Wall Street, it's
Yep.
big pharma, it's big oil when we talk about clean energy and gas and coal and all the rest. But that is such a vexing problem. I am continuing to work on that, proud to be still very involved in open democracy in the New Hampshire Rebellion. I wish I could live a couple multiple simultaneous lives and pursue all of these causes. But that work is continuing, and I would just add for folks here in New Hampshire who want to see progress on gun safety or almost any other issue, one important way to help move those fights forward is to fight big money in politics, which has a big role here in New Hampshire too. And a bill recently introduced with bipartisan support, Republicans and a bunch of Democrats, would create in New Hampshire a system of real citizen-funded elections where it's not how much money you bring to the table, it's the simple fact that you're a citizen. Every voter would be able to allocate 100 civic dollars to the candidates of their choice for state office so that they don't only get to speak on election day, by which time the big money has already determined who could run in the first place and largely what they stand for. They could actually choose who runs and support those candidates from the get-go.
Now that's interesting because I think you talked about that on the show when we were last here as kind of a real novel concept. And I'm surprised, actually, and pleasantly so, that you're telling me that there's a bipartisan group of people that put this bill forward.
There's
It's
a
actually
real
making
bill.
its way.
It's in the legislature.
That's awesome. That's
House
good
Bill
news.
1773, and it's an uphill fight. I will concede in this current climate, but a lot can change in an election, and we're only several months away from the next November elections.
Right, can't come soon enough.
So think civic dollars, think reforming the corrupting influence of money in politics to get the NRA and all the other undue influence out of politics. We can change this.
So was that bill that you described, was
1773.
1773, okay. Is that still, is it cleared committee? Is it going to the floor? Do you know?
We
I
didn't
don't
quite make it out of committee in the House. Our lead Republican sponsors in the Senate, Senator Dan Innes, and we're very grateful for his leadership. If it doesn't get revived and brought up when it comes to the full House floor, we may not have our day in the Senate this time around. But
it's
we
a-
see this as a building process.
Oh, it's a great idea. I'm so glad you brought that up, Dan, and that you're still pursuing this. And I urge everybody out there who cares about this issue, and I have to say I think everybody should follow this, because this does sound like a very promising thing. And Dan Innes is, of course, a Republican senator, so that's very encouraging.
And
Now-
it equals it equals the playing field. It makes
right.
your vote equal to everybody else's vote, as opposed to a fraction of what a big corporation could bring to the table. It was a good idea when I first heard it, and I am thrilled to hear that it's actually getting its due.
Well, we've spent years marching through the cold in New Hampshire winters, through the New Hampshire Rebellion, as some folks know firsthand.
Right,
And
you did.
we hope
You
to see the
came
fruits
at the State House
continue
from
to
all
build.
four directions of the compass, didn't you? All the way
That
from
is right.
Coos County to Concord, from Salem to Concord, from Portsmouth to Concord, from Keene to Concord.
That's right.
And that was a great thing. Well, let's talk about clean energy now, Dan, because you're now working for Revision Energy. Tell us what your job is for them, and then tell us about Revision Energy, why you chose to go with that company.
Well, the answer to that is pretty simple. I guess I could start. I won't give the whole story, but about the same time I was getting fired up by Granny D as a student at Conval High School, I was also involved in the Monadnock Solar Race Car Team.
Oh, yes.
You know, I saw that on your profile on the website, which I'm glad you're bringing that up, because I wanted to talk to you about
You
that.
know, it was a fun time. Back in the 1990s, there weren't a lot of solar cars on the road. I now get to drive a solar-powered Chevy Bolt. It's electric, and I plug in at home to my solar panels. At that time, I never dreamed that we would actually have homes not just powered with electricity, but also heating and cooling and transportation powered by the sun. But those were exciting days to get to kind of start dabbling in this field. And for the intervening 15, 20 years, however long it's been, I've felt all along that we need to deal with this corruption of our politics through campaign finance reform, and we need to save our dear planet. Planet's going to be here, no problem, but whether it will support human life
Is
in
an
the
issue.
coming generations is an open question, to be perfectly honest. If the
That's a
scientists...
very interesting point to make. The planet's going to make it through this one way or another. We can't kill that, but we can make it completely uninhabitable through our own volition. That's a point that
I mean, to get a little specific here, we are in what scientists consider the sixth great extinction, where the rate of extinction of life forms is at least 1,000 times the historic rate. There's a certain natural churn that occurs. We are 1,000 times faster or more. In the hour that we spend here, at least 6 discrete species will go extinct as a result of human activity, climate change, and other activities. So we are doing some real damage. And when I got to college, one of the first classes I took my freshman year was on geophysics and trends in climate change. And I've been pretty darn concerned ever since that we are not doing what we desperately need to do. And it became a whole lot more real for me a year and a half ago when my wife and I got a wonderful promotion and became the parents of twins. And so I'm not just worried about the next 60-odd years on planet Earth, but the next 100 years, God willing,
Yeah.
my kids will be
Having
around.
kids does that, and if you got twins, probably does it double.
It sure changes things.
Yeah.
And so after that last election, you mentioned I ran for executive council. I had the privilege of running in a very Republican district as a Democrat, thanks to gerrymandering after the 2010 census. Came close, but no cigar. And I was looking for something to do that would have a real demonstrable day-to-day impact. I knew I would continue the fight for campaign finance reform, but frankly, it's awfully hard to pass sweeping reforms in the current climate with the party in power as it is. So I was looking to get back into clean energy. And when I surveyed the landscape, this company where I'm proud to be an employee owner, I'm one of 218 co-owners of the company, a certified B Corp, a benefit corporation, which means we're legally committing ourselves to a triple bottom line. We don't just exist to make a profit, but first to address the needs of people and the planet. And I knew pretty quick that this was the home for me. And Revision Energy, as the largest solar installer in New Hampshire, is looking to help families, businesses, nonprofits, cities, towns, what have you, transition off of our current reliance on fossil fuels to 100% clean energy.
Wow.
And just to maybe put that in perspective, New Hampshire, as you probably know, we are 85% reliant on non-renewable energy today. We send out of state about $6 billion of our hard-earned money to import polluting, non-renewable energy, fossil fuels, nuclear. That's $11,000 per household. And yet we have the potential, according to great research done out of Stanford University, to be 100% clean energy,
Yes, we do.
primarily solar.
I have no doubt about it.
Well, on that good note, I have to regret for taking up so much of the beginning part of this first segment, but we've reached the end of the first segment
Yeah.
a little quicker than I would have liked to, but that's a real positive point to spring off of when we come back in a few
And
seconds.
we will. This will be our
regroup.
first of two breaks. It'll be a very quick one. And we hope you'll call in at 640-3091. We'll be back with Dan Weeks to discuss more about the status of the solar industry here in the Granite State and associated subjects. We'll be right back. Okay, again, hello everybody. This is the progress report for this Wednesday, February 21, 2018, and we are very pleased to have joining us Dan Weeks, a great representative of clean energy and campaign finance reform, two causes that he's invested a lot of his expertise and time in. And right now he is working for Revision Energy, which he just told us is the largest installer of solar projects in the state of New Hampshire, and very committed to having us transition away from polluting, expensive, and send your money out of state fossil fuels into a renewable future and an energy efficient future where we control our own destiny much more within the borders of our own state than we will ever be able to do with our current dependence on fossil fuel. So, Dan, it sounds good. We do see more solar panels in New Hampshire than we certainly have every year, and yet the industry is facing some real headwinds, isn't it? And one that you were mentioning I definitely wanted to bring up to you was the recently imposed federal Trump administration 30% import tariff on solar panels. 30%. Now, I'm sure that Trump would say, well, this is intended to help the solar industry by making our domestic solar panel manufacturers benefit by not facing such competition from abroad. But that's a pretty narrow-minded view and not entirely correct, isn't it?
I wish it was correct. Yeah, I wish we had a thriving solar manufacturing industry in the U.S. and that we could be adding thousands of good jobs in that sector. But all of the experts who've been looking at this for months as it was going through the Trade Commission proceedings, this case, which I will point out as a side note, the case was brought by ostensibly American manufacturers who happen to be owned by China and Germany and other foreign countries. So a bit of a paradox there in terms of who would benefit. The fact is, the solar value chain is big. Manufacturing of the solar cells, the silicon cells, is one small piece of a very large and fast-growing industry. In the U.S., there's only about 1,000 solar manufacturing jobs, but there is 250,000 jobs throughout the rest of the value chain.
And that includes the installation.
From the installation.
I wanted to bring that up. These are local jobs, too.
These are local jobs. Right in New Hampshire, about 1,200 jobs. I mentioned my company, 218 people between Maine and New Hampshire, and just stepping into Mass in the last couple of months. These are local folks electricians, a lot of them
Tradesmen.
young apprentices getting their education while they work a full-time job with benefits to support their families. It's the engineers, it's the designers, the sales, marketing, you name it. The whole rest of that value chain is right here in the U.S., 250,000 good jobs, and we are forfeiting, according to industry estimates, we could lose 23,000 jobs as a result of this tariff. As the cost,
23,000
Because
jobs.
the cost of doing business goes up because you got to get the product from where it's made.
That's
And it
exactly
just so happens, until we get our manufacturing base up to where they can supply the market, it's not smart to cut off the suppliers that you have.
That's exactly right. And even the most optimistic, rosy scenarios about what this could do for domestic manufacturing are very disappointing. It is just extremely unlikely that we will see domestic manufacturing take off.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at a
Can you
huge
talk
net
about
loss in
that a little
jobs.
bit? Why is that? Because, we have the manufacturing sector in the United States has been on a steady decline since before I was born. But we have good people who need those good paying manufacturing jobs and can do it well. It used to be made in America meant something. Why is it? Is it just purely cost that the cheap labor in these other markets allows them to because the material can't be that different?
That is the primary factor. We wish it weren't so, but we are a highly developed country. It means the cost of living is a lot more. I pay a lot more for rent than if I'm over in China. Southeast Asia, where a lot of the manufacturing happens, not necessarily China, but Singapore.
But Germany
countries.
has a manufacturing
They
industry.
do a lot of the design. They don't do a lot of the
Okay,
manufacturing.
well, you
So most of the more advanced countries are importing these panels, but plenty of good jobs to be had in the rest of the value chain.
well, it looks like we do have a call. We got John on the line, Bob.
Hey, John. Hi, John. Welcome to the Progress Report.
John is on the line.
John, you're live on the air.
Turn down your TV.
Hello?
Hi, John. It might be helpful if you turn your
Hi,
TV
yeah.
down a bit.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Hey, is there any news about the solar project in Manchester that had been proposed by Mayor Gatzis and what the future of that is?
Very good.
Excellent question.
Excellent question.
Can you bring us up to speed a little bit on that? This is something that's been kind of talked
Yeah,
about.
we should definitely talk about
I mean,
that.
back when I was in the State House, it was starting to be talked about, and then Mayor Gatzis did make a proposal. Enlighten us a little
This
bit.
is a great question and a huge opportunity. Let me just put this in perspective. We have in the state about 60 megawatts of solar installed. That's a very measly 0.4%, less than half of 1% of our electricity generation today is solar.
Yeah, by comparison, the Seabrook plant is about 1,100 megawatts of power generation.
That's right. Or by comparison, Massachusetts has roughly 7% solar penetration, 14 times what we have. Vermont is even higher. 60 megawatts installed. The landfill, which is unusable for virtually any other purpose, it's just empty land.
Well, there've been discussion. They're going to put some football fields out there, and they're going to be beautiful.
All right, sounds good to me. That landfill could support about 5 megawatts of solar.
That would be the biggest
fully-
installation in the
Be
state.
the
wouldn't it?
biggest by far in New Hampshire. And there are a lot of other large utility scale projects that are in the early stages, but huge potential there. When we develop, or other solar companies develop these kinds of large projects, we can get tremendous economies of scale, so the build price is very reasonable. And we're able to lock in a long-term rate of electricity that's literally on the order of 2, 3, 4 cents a kilowatt hour.
That's right.
At home,
The price
I'm
of
paying
the
20
sun's,
cents a
sun's
kilowatt
rays shining on Earth never varies.
In fact,
It's always, I think, free.
A single
Zero.
hour on planet Earth, we get enough sunlight to, were we to harness it all in 1 hour, we could power the world for a year. That's just how abundant the solar resource is, and New Hampshire is a very good place for it, in fact.
So what's the argument? I want to get back to the New Hampshire being a good place, but what's the argument against it? Because we have not been able to get this accomplished.
So as Bob, you know all too well from your service in Concord, there are some policy hurdles, some big hurdles. Right now, you cannot interconnect to the grid more than 1 megawatt of installed solar power.
Geez, who does that benefit?
That benefits the utilities and anybody who is the
However-
largely fossil fuel generating power sources.
However, there is a bill moving through. It happens to be a Senate bill that would up that to 5 megawatts, and it seems to have strong bipartisan support. So there's one piece of good news coming out of our state government.
Senate
for
Bill
the Senate.
446. We are optimistic that it'll get through the Senate in the coming weeks. The House could be a tough lift, as you know, and so for folks out there who are concerned about helping to move this clean energy transition forward, contacting your representative to support HB 446 SB 446
Senate bill.
would be a big help.
Yep. And Manchester did send somebody up to testify in favor of this bill, as requested by our mayor.
And
Mayor Craig.
back to the caller's question, I can say that your new mayor has been very supportive of clean energy. Unfortunately, the prior proposal the Mayor Gatsis brought forward ran afoul of current restrictions. They were proposing 3 megawatts. You can only interconnect 1 megawatt currently, but we hope that changes. But maybe the larger point worth making is because Manchester is not alone. There are plenty of these old landfills that are ripe for the picking to harvest solar energy. And we have, thanks to technological improvements, where the cost of solar panels has come down about 75% in the last 10 years, even in spite of moves like the president's tariff. And thanks to innovative financing mechanisms where even though a city or a nonprofit can't directly access the tax incentives, they can partner with an impact investor who can own the asset. So the city isn't having to fork over any money at all. They're just buying electricity from their own land at a reduced rate. And then if they choose to buy the array at the end of a power purchase agreement, they can get even lower cost electricity. But the pieces are in place. We need some policy change. A couple of other bills would help. But for nonprofits, cities, towns, as well as families, businesses, the technology is finally at a point where, unlike when I was on the solar car team, where it was a crazy dream for wealthy environmentalists, it's now actually
Those
practical.
cars didn't go fast. I remember them on TV.
Not
They
too
didn't-
fast. We could hit 70 miles an hour at top speed.
No kidding, really. I didn't think they
Did you
hit
ever,
that.
did you ever
No,
take
nice
the race
work.
and take your car up the Mount Washington in the solar car race?
We did indeed.
My son did that when he was at Dartmouth. It was great fun.
Those are pretty cool races they do on the auto road.
Yeah, they were pretty good.
I want to ask you, I interrupted a little bit. You were mentioning why New Hampshire is a good location for solar power. And we left the first segment talking a little bit about that there's been a study at Stanford that indicates New Hampshire is a good location. What is it about New
And
Hampshire?
especially since so many people think, well, it's too cloudy here, and it's
Well, it's dark at night and
gets-
it's cold too,
it gets-
so
it
those
gets- it gets
solar
dark
rays don't
early.
work in the cold.
This is for Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, but it's not true, and you can tell us why.
So if you look at a globe, put your finger on New Hampshire, and then spin around to Europe, we are on the same latitude as the northern Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Not way up in Germany, England, where in fact Germany for many years was the world leader in solar. I'm sorry to say China overtook them recently because they're going gangbusters in installing new
No,
solar
it
capacity.
shouldn't be sorry. It's a good thing. I
It
mean,
is a
the
good thing
more
for the
solar
Earth.
energy, the
I
less
just want the
fossil
U.S. to be leading the way, darn
fuel. Sure
it.
enough.
But we are, Germany, on a sunny, windy day, they can meet all of their power needs under ideal conditions from solar and wind.
And they've done it.
And they've done it.
Yeah.
They're the fourth largest economy on Earth.
Yeah.
We should be leading the way. They have 30% less solar potential than we do. The solar
they're at a higher
radiance.
latitude.
That's right. Just fewer hours of sunlight, more clouds as well. So while we aren't as sunny, we don't have as many hours as Arizona, our conditions, because cool temperatures actually improve the efficiency of solar panels and the inverters, our conditions are pretty darn good. And the Stanford research that I was mentioning, folks can look it up under the Solutions Project. What they've done is mapped the transition, what the pathway would be for every one of our 50 states and almost every country around the world to get from today, 85% fossil fuels, non-renewables, to 100% clean energy by 2050. And what they propose for New Hampshire, given our conditions, our geography, our solar irradiance, et cetera, we would be somewhere between 30 and 40% solar, rooftop, ground mounts, what have you. We would be a substantial portion wind, especially offshore wind, where there's tremendous potential in the Gulf of Maine. In fact, a study out of the Department of Energy suggests we could meet 6 times our total energy needs in the Gulf of Maine alone for all 6 New England states.
Yeah.
Huge potential. And then some hydro as well as a continuing baseline. But we could get to 100% clean energy, and according to their research, we would be paying less for electricity, and we would be adding at least 16,000 jobs. Not a bad deal.
That makes me really, really weep to think that a bill offered by one of my colleagues, a wonderful representative from Portsmouth named Peter Somsich, which would merely study whether New Hampshire could transition to 100% renewable energy by 2040, didn't get approved. Just to have a committee to study what it would take to see if that goal is feasible, and the elements we would need to achieve it if it is feasible.
You can't study things.
Yeah,
Bob.
you can't
It's
study
ridiculous
things.
to think
No.
you should ever study it.
You study it,
Come
but
on.
you means you might do it, you know? But we do, I believe, Dan, I believe I have heard that we do have one community in New Hampshire that has committed to 100% renewable.
Hanover, New Hampshire.
Hanover, New Hampshire, home of Dartmouth College, of course.
right.
And so if they can do it in Hanover, we should be able to do it in the state as a whole. And coming back to Manchester, I certainly think that this is the largest city in the state, and I hope the one that would lead the state in many ways. We should certainly move forward that landfill project and have the largest solar facility. Does Revision Energy do? I know you do an awful lot of rooftop solar installations for residences. I assume you do them for businesses as well. How about a project like that? Would Revision Energy possibly be a contractor that could undertake a project of that scope?
We are one of a handful of companies in New Hampshire that do undertake projects of that scope, multi-megawatt projects. And we are, I'll hasten to add, we're one of a couple dozen great solar companies. A lot of them are very small, and some will struggle with this latest presidential tariff to stay in business, but I sure hope they do. But we were talking earlier about the good jobs, local jobs that are in this industry, about 1,200 in New Hampshire. That's about 70 individual companies represented. Not a lot of them can develop these large projects. It is something that we've done with other cities in Maine and are working with a number of other cities and large businesses in New Hampshire. But I hope that somebody, I don't care who it is, I hope that somebody working with the mayor's office and other city leaders can make Manchester a leader in the state.
I certainly hope so. Let's talk about some of the other things that are happening. Oh, we're being told it's time for our second
let's
break.
take a quick break.
It's
and
a
we
good
can
time for a
regroup.
break. It'll be a very short one, but we'll continue our fascinating discussion with Dan Weeks about moving New Hampshire to a renewable energy future, which is our goal. We do have a state goal of achieving 25% of our electric energy supply from renewable sources by the year 25.
Holy cow, 25%, Bob. That is such a high goal.
25 by 25 is
You know,
goal.
when I was in school, if I got a 25 on a test, I was aces. I thought that was great. All right, we'll take a break.
We'll talk about what's happening in our neighboring states and about whether we can up our goal or whether there's any problems meeting that goal, and maybe some of the other headwinds that the industry is facing in New Hampshire from the policy perspective. But a lot to talk about. Call in if you would like to join us, 640-3091. Love to hear from you. We'll be right back. Okay, folks, we're winding down to our final segment of this progress report for this Wednesday, the next to last Wednesday in the month of February. We've enjoyed we're talking about clean energy. is mostly but not entirely solar energy. We certainly enjoyed the solar energy provided to us all today. It was very delightful, and as I mentioned earlier, people were dining out on the sidewalk on Elm Street as I was walking down here today. And tomorrow they say it may snow, but in any event, that's life in New England. But we
Could
are.
I just interrupt you on that for a moment, Bob? Because it didn't used to be life in New England.
Yeah.
We didn't used to get 70-degree days in the middle of February.
You get the January thaw, it might get up to 35, you know?
That's right. That's right. I mean, I remember I learned to ski on Temple Mountain. You know what
Yeah.
Temple Mountain is now? It's a bunch of trees.
Yeah.
Beautiful trees. Nothing wrong with it. But we are. UNH has some great climate scientists. They've been at the forefront.
Right,
They've
they
come
do.
out with great studies on what is actually happening and what is projected to happen based on all the available data. We are on track in New Hampshire to see temperatures rise. If we don't change course, we will see temperatures rise by the end of this century by 12 degrees Fahrenheit. That will put us as a climate, not the New Hampshire I knew growing up. We will be something like the Carolinas. And you can only imagine what the Carolinas are going to be like by the end of this century as everything warms to that extent. We have $4.5 billion worth of property value in the seacoast directly at risk from rising sea levels.
And we're seeing damaging tides regularly now, even
On a
without
sunny day in the
even
streets
without
of
a major
Hampton.
storm in the ocean. These so-called king tides are
When
higher
the
and
moon's
more
full,
damaging.
we have a problem with our
Yeah,
tides, you know?
so-called king tides.
That's right.
Yeah.
So billions of dollars in our property value. We lose an estimated 100 lives a year due to respiratory ailments that are directly caused by carbon pollution, what we spew out of our tailpipes and burn in our power plants. Those 100 lives cost us taxpayers about $1 billion a year in public health expenses, not to mention the struggles for the families themselves. By every measure, I look at key industries, the skiing industry, a lot of great technological improvements. They can make snow more efficiently in warmer weather, but still a lot of these little ski mountains have gone out of business and are not likely to come back. Our wildlife, our moose, I mean, what's more iconic for New Hampshire than the moose? We've lost about half of our moose population in the last decade or so. Our
This
young
is
moose are
attributed to
down.
the ticks who survive the winters now because they're not as cold.
On these warm winter days, the ticks do just great. We don't kill them off because we don't have those colds like we used to. So by every measure, we are doing huge damage to our planet. And again, planet's going to be around, but I'm not so sure my kids will be able to enjoy what I enjoyed growing up.
Yeah.
And so you pick your reason. Economics, you can save a lot of money with solar and other clean technologies, or if you love the great outdoors, as most people in New Hampshire do,
Or if you like to live, if you just kind of want to live.
there you go. I'll
you
take
don't
that.
want to breathe some clean air.
Yeah.
It's pretty basic stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, for policy reasons, for ideological, it's not even policy, it's ideology. For ideological reasons, one group of people in power will say, well, the science isn't determined yet. There's disagreement among scientists.
And if I could just add one other reason. So virtually all
I
climate
apologize. I didn't
scientists.
mean to interrupt.
You're absolutely right. It just sparked another thought, which is I think it's partly ideology. Frankly, I think it takes us right back to the money in politics. Because 93% of the so-called studies casting doubt on climate science were funded by none other than ExxonMobil, who together with other major oil and gas companies contributed $250 million in the last election in 2016. Another 50-odd million from other energy fossil fuel sectors where the renewables came in at a tiny fraction, maybe less than a tenth that amount. So they've been funding these political campaigns similar to the NRA for decades now. They've been spending millions of dollars on lobbying, and so I hate to say it, but I think we've got corruption on our hands. I don't know what the individual legislators who deny climate science actually believe, but I sure know that they're getting 6 or 7 figures to fund their campaigns from the interests that are funding this pseudoscience to cast doubt on
And they
climate
select
change.
their sources of information, and those selections, I think, are heavily influenced by the fossil fuel industry and their outreach. You didn't mention the Koch brothers and Americans for Prosperity, but I think we can throw them in there. they have made a deliberate and so far for them quite successful decision not only to deal with Congress, which seems to be entirely bought and paid for, but with state legislators. So we have a very formidable presence from a lobbyist for AFP in the State House. It didn't end with Corey Lewandowski going off to be part of the Trump campaign and then get fired. It didn't end with them. They have a new campaign manager or director here in New Hampshire for the Americans for Prosperity, and he shows up at every committee hearing where we have a bill to incentivize or promote a non-fossil fuel future. We have
So,
them.
Bob, what's his argument? My paymasters will lose money if we do this? What is his argument?
No, his argument is that all kinds of things, that the upfront costs are too great for solar, and we should talk about how that's being handled, because there is a problem with a homeowner. So many of us
Upfront
are,
cost for everything.
everything.
When you buy a car,
Although
you pay
I-
for it and then you drive it.
I will note that a lot of our customers don't actually pay anything up front. They take out a solar loan, so they basically substitute their electric bill to Eversource or the utility for a monthly loan payment. And once they've paid off their system, they've got free power for decades to come.
Some of the companies I know, like Sunrun, which is a national company, and Solar City. By the way, I don't see as much evidence of them as I was a couple of years ago. But in any event, they were doing the financing for customers themselves. Does Revision Energy do that, or did you just point them to the institutions that can help out?
That's a great question. So the model that particularly Solar City brought to New Hampshire in 2015 was leasing, where you don't own the system, you lease your roof. Nice in terms of cash flow, having no upfront cost, but unfortunately the savings that a customer gets are a small fraction of what they get when they own the panels, because when you own them, all that power is yours for free. So we refuse to lease systems. It just isn't in the customer's interest, but we do provide direct financing options. So it's effectively the same thing, where there's no out-of-pocket cost. You're substituting one bill for your loan payment.
Because that's another argument that they make against solar, Mike, is it's for the elite, the wealthy people who can indulge their environmental preferences regardless of cost. That's an argument they make. But
That was
solar,
true 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I'll give them that. Maybe they just haven't looked at any
But if it's
numbers in the
just the
last
electric
10
bill,
years.
if you're just transferring that you're writing a check to pay for your solar array as opposed to writing a check for the electricity you used last month and it's gone, how does that impact a budget? It seams to me that it's the same.
It's neutral. That's right.
Yeah.
And the bottom line, to make it a little personal, we've got 17 panels on our roof. The upfront cost for that system was around $12,000. We haven't been paying the utility hardly anything since. So we save $1,200 to $1,500 a year in electricity. And so the payback is relatively short, and then we've got free power.
Well, and I know. I
the
remember,
future.
when I first kind of got out on my own, electric bills were $50, and it was hard to pay. I mean, my electric bills sometimes $300. I mean, I would expect I could buy a pretty nice solar array for $300 a month.
I'll bet you
I
could.
bet
yeah.
I could buy a nice one for $250 and save some money too.
Hey, Mike, you got a roof that sun shines on?
I have a very nice roof that's
Well,
got
there you
sunshine
go.
on it. We may have to talk after the show.
Sure.
That made me want to come to another subject, or maybe a couple of them if we've got time, about state policy on this. One of the things that's happened, by the way, we're spending an awful lot of time, people like me who agree with Dan and our solar industry's importance for many reasons. We are fighting a constant rearguard action against rolling back some of our commitments to renewable energy. One recently happened, a House bill that would have capped our commitment for solar and other innovative technologies at the current commitment of 6%. It was supposed to advance to 15% by 2020, I guess, or I don't remember. And to my dismay, the committee on which I sit, Science, Technology, Energy, on a very narrow 11 to 10 margin, voted that ought to pass, to cut that goal back to current 6%. We mounted a real effort to overcome that in the House, fell 3 votes short, just 3 votes short of overturning it. Still very hopeful in the Senate. But how important is that in terms of Revision Energy and our solar future?
It's critically important, to be honest. we are probably a decade behind. I hate to say this because I'm a proud Granite Stater, but we're probably a decade behind Massachusetts, Vermont, because they saw the writing on the wall and they said, as a matter of state priorities, we are going to set real goals toward eventually getting to 100%. They aren't anywhere near it. 8% solar is the number in Vermont, 7% in Massachusetts. But that is 15 times better than where we are in New Hampshire. They set those goals through their renewable portfolio standards, which that bill you mentioned, House Bill 114, would cut back. And what that did is it sent a powerful message to the industry saying we are open for solar business. We want to add thousands of good local jobs in this industry and clean up our
You
environment.
can take the risk of investing in a company, and we will have your back. You don't have to worry that we're going to pull the rug out from under you with a bill that might roll back some standards like this.
That's right. And by having our back, we're not talking about much in the way of direct subsidies. We're
No,
talking
I didn't mean to
about
imply that. It's just the market will be there for you.
That's right. Because the utilities have to progress toward these goals under the Renewable Portfolio Standard, and if they aren't changing course, then they pay a modest penalty. And what that penalty has gone into in New Hampshire is the Renewable Energy Fund, which in turn has been used to incentivize homeowners leading the transition themselves. If the utilities aren't going to, they'll pay their modest penalties, and then homeowners who go solar or businesses can access some funds out of the Renewable Energy Fund to do so. If we cut the goal in half, less than half, from 15 to 6%, the utilities say, hooray, we don't have to do a thing more. We're effectively saying no thanks to additional clean energy development.
So they won't do it unless they get paid, or unless they get forced to do it. They're not going to. Well, but
I know a lot of,
it's not in their economic interest. It's not in their bottom line.
yes and no. If just a quick wrinkle there, I know a lot of good folks at Eversource and the other utilities who are driving electric cars. Who, speaking of electric cars, if we get off of gasoline and go to electricity to power our transportation system, there's going to be a lot more electricity demand. And as that company is transitioning more to transmission and distribution instead of power generation, they stand to benefit from this system.
Because they'll be transmitting
we
and
pay for those
distributing more
powers
electricity in the end.
Exactly
which
right.
is what their new business model is going to look like.
But there's some updates that need to happen in our thinking. We need to accept the science and see the opportunities that are before us.
We haven't got a heck of a lot of time left, but I wanted to cover one other thing if we can, Dan, and that's the subject of net metering. Because, folks, if you've got solar panels on your roof, and it's a nice, hot, sunny August afternoon, and the sun is pouring down, and you're washing your dishes, you're running your air conditioning, everything in your TV, you got power to spare. Under net metering, you can send the extra power back over the line, have your meter go backwards, and get some money from the utility for contributing to the demands all the other customers place on them. That's called net metering. And recently we've had some changes in that due to a PUC docket. And is the solar to determine the price at which you will get for contributing to the power grid's demands.
You mean it's not the same as what they get?
We wish, but not quite.
I'm asking that partly tongue-in-cheek because I know it's not, but I'd
not.
like you to say. So they can generate electricity, which is ions, and they push it into my house, and they charge me X dollars. But when I push that same ion back into their house, they don't pay me as much as what I had to pay them.
That's right.
Pretty interesting. How do they get away with that stuff?
It's a longer conversation.
We don't have enough time to explain the whole thing, but a couple of comments.
But net
if you can.
metering is such a crucial part of the equation because I mentioned my 17 solar panels on my roof. On those bright sunny days, we're producing 3 times what we use in the house, and we're literally sending electrons to our neighbors and powering them. What's the reason that we think the utilities are wrong to pay us less when we export solar electricity is that the electricity that we are sending out corresponds to the moments of peak demand.
Yeah.
I wanted to get into that because
When
that's
the
when all the
ACs are
ACs are
churning
running.
on
That's
a
when
bright
all the ACs are
summer
running.
afternoon and evening.
By the way,
And that's when they'd have to fire up the Bull coal
Yeah,
plant.
which are the
to
most
meet-
expensive to run.
and the dirtiest.
That's exactly right.
And it used to be a winter peak in New England, but because of the changing climate, And air conditioning, the peak is now in the summer months, late in the afternoon, and solar goes gangbusters at that time, and it really helps. And as I say, that's where big cost savings can be achieved because you're not having to fire up your most expensive and dirtiest
But that's
generators.
the thing. The rate that they charge doesn't depend on what their rate's locked in, and when they have to fire up that Bow power plant, they're losing money. But if I'm pushing electrons back into their house, I'm helping them not lose money. Except I'm losing money because I'm paying. They're keeping a piece of what I'm paying and what I'm pushing back. I'm going to ask again. How do they get this stuff done? They must be brilliant up in Concord. Their arguments must be so golden.
I will be a bit of a broken record and say there is a lot of money in politics from our friends at the utilities.
Not all that happens in the House.
I was serving
And you
that
know,
up as a
and you know
softball
this, Mike.
for you.
It's not all reasoned discourse up there. Let's,
I
let's just say
understand.
that.
I'm being facetious. I'm sorry. I started off the show a little angry. I'm a little happier now. I'm hearing some really good news.
This is really good stuff, isn't it?
So I'm getting a little bit more lighthearted. I
And
apologize.
it is
I don't mean
time-
to minimize the work. It's hard work.
It is time for New Hampshire to up its game, both on renewable energy, which Dan has well pointed out, we lag well behind our neighbors on this, and also in our energy efficiency. The solar industry doesn't quarrel with energy efficiency as the best and cheapest and most environmentally divine resource we have.
Absolutely.
Complemented with renewables like solar. And we haven't talked about wind, but we could because wind is
Not
a
today. We're out of
tremendous
time.
potential. Yeah, I guess we are out of time. Next week, Mayor Jim Donchis, don't fail to join us then. That should be very interesting to talk about the interests we have between our two largest cities. Want to thank Dan Weeks for coming
Thanks a
in.
lot,
He
Dan.
had to make other arrangements to be here. Certainly appreciate it, and I think it's been a really great discussion. Thank you, folks. We'll be back next week.